Welcome to Talking Education from the Varkey Foundation. By entering conversations like this, you are helping to raise teachers' voices and give every child a quality education. Please watch, click, subscribe, and start talking education. Our vision is quality education for every child, through work in the classroom to the highest halls of government. This new decade brings the opportunity to release the vital conversations usually confined to conference halls to the 2.65 billion people that use social media. Education debates aren't the preserve of academics. Everybody deserves to be part of them. Together, we have an opportunity to advance and bring a diverse audience into our mission as we discuss education's problems, collaborate on their solutions, and most importantly, show the incredible work of those on the front line of education. Good evening, everyone. Well-trained teachers have never been more important to prevent COVID, leaving millions of students around the world falling behind. However, according to UNESCO, even before COVID-19, around 15% of primary and secondary school teachers around the world have not received sufficient training. Unfortunately, this is probably set to get worse with the pandemic, hampering the abilities of colleges and universities to train the teachers many countries so desperately need, especially in online and distance learning in this transformed education landscape. On top of this, 69 million new teachers are still needed to provide quality universal primary and secondary education by 2030. How can governments, universities and schools ensure we train the teachers the world requires to provide every single child their birthright of a quality education? Today, we're going to discuss the challenges and solutions to training teachers in the age of COVID and beyond. My name is Dr. Saima Rana, and I am the Chief Education Ambassador at the Varkey Foundation. Today, I have with me 4 colleagues who are Augustin Torres, Regional Director, Latin America from the Varkey Foundation. Professor Mark Hardman from Institute of Education, UCL. Dennis Simvolo from Education International, and Amy Bellinger from Education Commission. Welcome to the panel. If our audience today have questions, please do feel free to submit them in the live chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So, Dennis, I'd like to ask you this question. The lack of good quality teacher training and professional development is a global problem, but there are still huge disparities in the developed and developing economies. In sub-Saharan Africa, almost half, 42% of the 6.4 million primary and secondary teachers impacted by COVID school closures are not trained according to UNESCO. Firstly, what do you recommend governments do to scale up teacher training where the problem is the greatest in parts of the world such as sub-Saharan Africa?
Yes, thank you very much. The first thing really is to make teaching a first choice profession. It's important to make it attractive by improving working conditions. Improving salaries is fundamental. Otherwise, people will not be attracted to it. And then, of course, it should be free. Teacher education should be free or at least affordable as per the agreement in SDG 4. And then, of course, it's important to expand enrollment in our universities and other teacher education institutions. It's important to target those people who are in the field, but are not fully trained or qualified through targeted upgrading programs that are of sufficient quality. And then, of course, governments can also recruit teachers from other countries. Of course, you are aware that in the current context, that may not be possible. So teacher professional development should be the way to go so that teachers receive training, but also so that they are able to acquire the necessary digital technologies to be able to support their students. Thanks.
Thank you. You know, it's really interesting you talk about the cost of training, and training in teacher training in parts of our world is incredibly expensive. However, there is a part to play. Technology has a part to play today, and we've seen how technology is really supporting teacher training. But one of the things that I find really interesting is equity of access to technological online training, because of course all of our teachers don't have the gift of a gadget, which is so important and really, really crucial at this time. And it's something that we need to sort of be aware of when we are looking at teacher training in the state of COVID. Professor Mark Hardman, what do you think? I mean, what kind of teacher training experiences have you had in terms of online teacher training, and what do you think about equity versus quality versus access?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of the issue for me is making sure that it's the pedagogy that's the most important thing, and the technology comes afterwards. I think there's a real risk that we end up developing the way we're teaching around the technologies we have, and that's not necessarily the best teaching. So at the UCL Institute of Education, we've done quite a lot of work bringing teacher training online. So we'll be using online sessions with tutors initially, but it's making sure that we've got the work groups, we've got people who can talk to each other, we've got spaces where the teachers can reflect and they can show us things. We've got video work going on, so they can use video to show us what's happening, and we can kind of recreate some of the aspects that we might have if we were actually observing in the classroom. Now, of course, we're very lucky because we're in a place where we've got the technology to do that. But of course, in the developing world and in different parts of the world, those technologies aren't there. So I was actually hearing from one of the other panel members about the use of WhatsApp. That's a brilliant way of doing things, bringing things in that a lot of teachers might have access to, which is there. But then also not neglecting the face-to-face and the groundwork that can be done in developing teachers through experienced teachers who are already in that locale, and that can't be underestimated either.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of, you say that it's about focusing on pedagogy and not the technology, and we have seen, I suppose, in the time of COVID, never has it been truer that teaching is about relationships, about human connections, about pedagogy, about philosophy, about the love and the passion of your subject, of growth and development of children, and not about disruption with a replacement of teachers with technology, which is what lots and lots of researchers and scientists have been working on previously. And we've seen today that people are crying out for the human connection and crying out for teachers, in particular parents, I would say, having children at home at the moment. So, Augustine, can you sort of talk to me a little bit about the fact that how technology plays a part in teacher training in areas that you are connected with, and areas such as Africa and so on?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and for the conversation that put us together from different sides of the world to learn from one another. What I can share that the experience in Latin America at the moment, that we move most of our training to WhatsApp, is trying to understand where the conversation is. So most of us are connected through WhatsApp now. Not all the teachers have a computer, but most of them, I would say more than 96-97% are connected through WhatsApp, and they have access to connect with others and to be with others there. So we need to adapt. That is the situation today, and we have to move whatever we can through that channel. Understanding that it's not the same. So this will not replace any face-to-face experience, but it's a way to go during the pandemic. And we are doing our training through WhatsApp, sending the initiatives, sending the kind of homework for teachers through these channels. And what I'm glad to say is that during this hard time, that it's very hard for teachers because they are taking care of their own homes and taking care of students in different times. So it's much more work than being in a classroom for a few hours. This is a full life or full day experience. And during this time, with all this context, they are looking forward to more training. And that is not surprising me, but it's something that I'm glad to say, that teachers look themselves for professional development opportunities. They are looking how to learn, to incorporate more of the technology and to adapt the pedagogy to the new channels that they have. So this is one of the good takeaways for me during this time. We have more to learn, but we are, in that way, this is a good starting point.
Thank you, Augustine, for being with us today as well. you know, you talk about how teachers really want to be trained and want to access online training and want to be working with trainers and so on. And I've, in my experience of being a principal and being in education for just over 20 years, I've never met a teacher who doesn't want training, who doesn't want access to good training. And part of my work has taken me to slum areas of Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Kashmir. And I've never heard a teacher say, I just don't want to be trained. And what I do each Friday, I hope this is interesting to you all, I spend about an hour and a half with a group of slum school teachers from Kashmir, from India, from Pakistan, who are all arguing, by the way, for land and territory. But on a Friday afternoon, they all get together on their whatever the gadgets they have, mobile phones, laptops, iPads, or whatever they can find, friends getting together. And I give them training. I train them for about an hour and a half. And they always turn up, come rain or shine, come COVID or not, they always turn up. And we've been doing this for about just over 5 years, and they always turn up. There's never a reason for them not to turn up, because they absolutely love it. Somebody the other day sent me a picture in South Africa of a group of teachers sort of huddled around a mobile phone with a makeshift sort of stand, and online training was being delivered to this group. And it just really, my heart nearly burst with joy, because it shows the power of teacher training and the power of teachers coming together and wanting to learn to better their profession. So in that respect, I suppose, Amy, what as schools and universities around the world continue to teach online, and they are going to continue to teach online for a number of years, whether it's blended or hybrid or completely online, and with potentially the whole model of teaching and learning transforming very, very quickly at the moment, how do we rapidly train up our teachers across the globe to teach online? Because it's incredibly different teaching in the classroom and teaching online. And how do we ensure that their understanding of the latest technology in education is fit for purpose and is accurate? Are there any good examples that you've seen or you can sort of reference for us?
Thank you very much. So in terms of online or the use of technology, I actually think, and the evidence would support, that is best used for teaching teachers, and that many countries around the world are not ready to, or have the infrastructure to actually use technology to teach students. So I was just looking at some recent data, and in Senegal, for example, less than 11% of students have had access to any form of technology, whether that's a radio or a television. And even in Kenya, where they've been quite proactive around their different forms of online and remote learning, only 22% have access to digital learning. So I do think we need to be realistic. I think, as Mark said and Augustine says, there are some great examples of teacher training and providing professional development for school leaders and others within the community through low-tech opportunities. These include WhatsApp groups in refugee camps. They include showing small videos in Bangladesh to teach teachers how to teach more effectively. But I think in terms of teaching remotely, I think the important thing is to help teachers understand what's possible within their context, and to use a mixture of approaches that may include very remote learning approaches, even using paper, but harnessing the community, parents, community education workers, to support that learning and make sure that regardless of access to technology, every child is learning.
Thank you for that. I think you're absolutely right in terms of looking at infrastructure and looking at how, when we are talking about online teaching and learning and we're talking about online training, we have to think about the context in which we are wanting to execute this training in terms of infrastructure. And we find in countries like the United Kingdom, for example, there are many schools that just don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the finances, and governments are taking seriously now the fact that they don't have the infrastructure to have this online teaching and learning space for the children and the teachers, but hadn't done previously, and that's today a massive problem for them. So there is something in that, I would argue, in terms of looking at infrastructure and the whole state and the whole piece around schools, education institutes, and what we need to be able to deliver first-class teacher training via online for all children. But the quality of teacher training is clearly, as we know, is incredibly different from country to country. So, for example, in some parts of the world, we find teachers are incredibly well qualified, incredibly qualified in their subject, and have the knowledge in terms of their subject. Yet the teacher training training that they've been given is inadequate. You know, the structure, the sort of system doesn't exist. And it's really, really difficult to be able to somehow form a consistent approach to teacher training in those countries. Dennis, what do you think in terms of your experience, in terms of the inconsistencies of teacher training in different parts of the world?
Yes, indeed, it's a big challenge. There was some research done by the Commonwealth Secretariat looking at teacher qualifications across the Commonwealth. They are quite variable. So it's a big challenge because it becomes a barrier to teacher mobility. So it's important that we have common standards. In other words, I'm referring to professional teaching standards, which could then be the lowest common denominator, if you like, or the bar that would define the quality of teacher education across different countries. Of course, such professional standards should be agreed among governments, but most importantly, within the profession itself. My organization, Education International, working together with the UNESCO, which is an intergovernmental organization, came up with a global framework of professional teaching standards. So we recommend that document for you, and it could help governments actually, especially regional intergovernmental bodies, to come up with professional standards that could be used actually to facilitate mobility across countries and recognition of qualifications. It's important that we also, of course, use the existing instruments that we have. We have the 1966 ILO UNESCO recommendation concerning the status of teachers, and we have the 1997 UNESCO recommendation concerning the status of higher education teaching personnel. We have the 2014 ILO guidelines concerning the status of early childhood educators. So these are existing instruments as well as UN conventions that define the teaching profession and as well as workers' rights, etc. All these should be used and should be respected. For example, the 1966 recommendation states very clearly that all teachers must be trained at university level or in universities or equivalent institutions. So if all governments were to adhere to that provision, we would have a common standard already defined in 1966, which would facilitate the movement of teachers across borders. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Dennis. I mean, what's really interesting is that you talk about the global framework for teaching standards, and you know, these things exist, yet we still have standards that differ from country to country, but we also have some unqualified teachers in schools, and we also have some very interesting businesses that are launching into teacher training and partnering with other businesses to ensure that teachers are trained through a number of various frameworks that aren't necessarily government approved. So Professor Hardman, what do you think is the role of schools and universities in training teachers here? How can we better tap into, I suppose, university, but also in-house expertise and training within schools? And how practical is it, I suppose, to rely on existing teachers and lecturers to help us to train these teachers?
Yeah, no, that's really important. I think there's different aspects of teacher training that need to be considered here, of course, and I think we do want parity, and we do want all of the teachers in the world to be trained and supported to a reasonable standard, but we don't want to assume a uniformity whereby every teacher does the same thing. So professional standards are really, really important, but what does professionalism mean? I've worked in Vietnam and Armenia, done a bit of work with Jordan, been to Kerala. The professionalism there means something slightly different because of the communities they work with, and that's something that Amy talked about earlier, that kind of harnessing of the community. And that speaks to your last question there, Seema, about how do you rely on existing teachers and draw on existing teachers? I think you absolutely have to, because although professional standards are hugely important, and speaking to Dennis's point, we have these kind of, I mean, master's level is well recognized, but what a master's program does is give you some of the theoretical tools, some of the understandings of what learning is and what instruction is, but to then deploy that as a professional in a classroom relies on local knowledge and understanding of school systems, understanding of communities, understanding of the disadvantage within those communities, communities and how that might play out. So I feel it needs to be a collaboration between universities who can bring some of that research evidence, between schools where there are experts in the communities that are being worked with, and with communities themselves to understand what those communities need. So it's a very complex picture, as we all understand, and standards and professionalism are really important, but they don't necessarily specify what every teacher does. We couldn't have a global teaching program that gave everybody the same training. It just wouldn't work, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And in terms of when we look at our curriculum content or when we look at our delivery, we always contextualize it, don't we, for our student community. And again, it goes back to what Amy was saying about looking at the context and within which you are working to be able to deliver something appropriate. And of course, I absolutely agree with that. But what do you think, Augustine, what do you think during COVID we can do to support this type of teacher training? You know, the sort of framework and looking at context, because clearly the last year, I mean, I've been working with trainee teachers, and the last year has been incredibly difficult for trainee teachers. Some of them have had to stop their training. Some of them can't finish when they thought they were going to finish, and it's being sort of stretched into next year. But we need teachers. So come September, we need our trainee teachers who should have or have completed to start teaching. So I suppose my question is twofold. One is, what kind of gaps do you think we're going to see when teachers arrive in the classroom who have just completed their training? And two, what can we do to support them? What kind of program or initiative, or what can we do? What kind of things do you know of?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's well, depending also on the calendars. Schools will be open in different ways and different percentages of students coming in. So there will be many challenges. And no one is ready. I will say no one was ready in March to the lockdown and to start teaching remotely. We were not ready to work remotely. Governments were not ready to run themselves on a remote way. So we are all learning through the process. So I think the first strategy, we need to be patient to one another, and we need to work together. Now, more than ever before, families are working with teachers, school principals are working with teachers, and that I can say in a very good way. So we need to keep working together. For me, is the key first thing. So we cannot be demanding more on others on the new phase or when schools are back again. And secondly, I would say the school principals play a key role here. Mainly professional development for teachers, not only the initial training, but professional development as well, has been run by the government or by national institutions or local institutions, but not from each school. What I would try to say is, like, you are a teacher in a school, but maybe your principal is not pushing you or supporting you to go for professional development or to keep studying. And I think now more than ever, we need those training to be done in the school, or at least to be promoted in the school. So the school principal has to be in charge and responsible for the professional development of teachers, in the way that trying to find ways for the teachers to keep growing, to keep learning, to bring the tools into the school, that particular school. We were talking about context. So how to bring the expertise that we need in this particular context. So I will say we need to empower school principals in order for them to have the ability, the capacity, and the tools to be supporting the training for teachers in general, the last steps of the initial training, as well as the professional development.
Yes, Augustine, you talk about, the continuous development cycle, and you talk about growth, and I completely agree with you. It is a job of every stakeholder in a school community to support the training and the development of teachers, in particular, not to say the least, I would say the principal. Teacher training was once thought of something that you could undertake at the beginning of your career, but now, we're talking more and more about continual professional development, about continual growth. So Amy, how important is the idea of teacher training being something that is continuous, that is a lifelong purpose or a process, and how can this model be further developed? Because we talk about it quite a lot in schools, but does it actually happen?
Thank you. I think it's extremely important, and recent OECD report, I think, would confirm that based on the evidence they've seen. I think there just needs to be much more alignment between what happens at the beginning of, or the inputs, if you like, into the education system and what teachers are trained, and then keeping them up to date based on evidence, of how teaching practices change, perhaps how the priorities have changed, changes in curriculum. There are lots of things that change throughout a teacher's career, and teachers themselves change. So providing that support, but that does need a lot of collaboration between all the different key stakeholders. So teacher training institutions and the role they play beyond initial teacher training, the role of district education officers, perhaps centres of excellence, course policymakers and teachers and school leaders themselves. I think one important point, just to go back on the making sure it's evidence-based, is to try and encourage greater collaboration between teachers who are putting some of that learning into practice and feeding that feedback back to the teacher training institutions, to the professional development courses, so that it's continually evolving and adapting to the evidence that's coming out of the system.
Yes, and when you talk about centre of excellence, if you like, and you talk about continually feeding into the training process, and Augustine said something earlier about ensuring that stakeholders promote teacher training and promote teaching as a great profession. You know, at the moment there's a global shortage of young teachers, and I suppose this is globally a fact. So Dennis, how important is it to have younger people join the profession? I mean, is it important? Because we're talking about a shortage of teachers across the globe, but in particular young teachers. And how can we make teacher training more attractive so that it is seen as something that is, a role that is excellent and a role that is really purposeful and meaning and attracts the under 30s who perhaps are looking for a career change, in particular during COVID. People have lost jobs. People are looking for meaning and purpose through their work, and what better job to do than become a teacher if you want real meaning and real purpose. So how do we attract these under 30s, and is it important to attract them?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the teaching profession, like any other profession, needs to renew itself. That's why we need young people from our universities or from other other education institutions. So definitely we need to attract young people. But how do we do it? First of all, we must understand why they are not choosing teaching as their first choice profession. That's the starting point. And we carry out this triennial survey every 3 years on the status of the teaching profession. We have one coming up this year. It's a major survey carried out by Education International. What comes out of that survey is that basically it's about the status of the profession. It's very low. The working conditions are poor. The salaries are relatively low. So if you improve the working conditions, improve the salaries, it will attract a great deal of candidates. So that's the primary focus, really, if we're to make a difference. That should be the primary focus. And then, of course, there are other incentives other than money, which is fundamental, like I've just said, which we need to look into, primarily governments, really, providing training, continuous training, professional development, providing opportunities for teachers to network within their own locality, whether it's a school, whether it's a cluster, a district, a province, a country, and across borders. That has so much value, allowing young people, after COVID, hopefully it will be possible to engage in exchange visits with other young people across the borders, modernize our schools and institutions, move away from chalk and talk, which remains relevant and valuable, but also introduce digital technologies that can facilitate teaching and learning. That can also mean changing some of the rooted practices in our education systems and become responsive to the needs of teachers. It means engaging with teachers on a continuous basis through their teacher unions, their representative organizations, so that we can respond to their needs each time. So there are multiple things that governments can do. So yes, it's important to attract young people, but it's also important to keep the older teachers in the profession. Thanks.
I really enjoyed, Dennis, your response there, in particular your keywords, exchanges, your keywords of, in particular, engagement. But I really liked the phrase that you used about renewing ourselves. COVID has shown us in every facet of our life that we do need to renew ourselves, whether it's thinking hard about who we are and what we do and the impact we have on the lives of others, not just our own. But it's also about renewing the professions that we're in. And I found that really interesting. And at the moment, Professor Hardman, young people increasingly like to travel and experience different cultures. And you've told us a little bit about your teaching experiences, and I've told you a little bit about mine. And I learn so much when I'm teaching, training, or just being with children under a massive tree in the mountains of Kashmir teaching, or whether I'm in a big private school, massively expensive fee-paying school. You learn about different cultures and different strategies of leadership and teaching and learning, but you realize the one thing, and that is that every child wants to be successful in something, and every parent wants their child to be successful in something, and every teacher wants their child to be successful, their student to be successful. So, I think that post-COVID, people will still want to travel, teachers will still want to travel. To further help attract more young people, this would be a great opportunity for the teaching profession, perhaps to, and I know you've talked a little bit about that, context is really important, but it would be good to have an internationally recognized, perhaps, teacher training qualification. You talked a little bit about master's program, I think, earlier, and some of the practical problems that we face and some of the really great implementation or execution wins that we garner when we're supporting teacher training or when we're teaching children. What do you think the issues could be in implementing a strategy as such?
Yeah, great question. When you were talking then, Saima, about that experience of teaching and that kind of giving you goosebumps because you're getting that feedback from children, and same as you, I'm sure I've spoken to and worked with children in countries where we're speaking a different language, but there's still something about that connection with young people, which is amazing. And we absolutely want younger adults and young adults to start engaging in teacher training and thinking about how they could travel the world and experience what's going on. So I think Dennis has spoken to this as well. There are professional standards which can broadly be applied across different jurisdictions. A lot of our student teachers from London are able to teach in other countries once they've got a master's level qualification, so that's increasingly something that's recognised. But just to say again that the master's qualification really is about the academic side of things, it's about the understanding of the theory, whereas again the practice is something that needs to come on the ground. And of course it also requires teacher training institutions and schools to take a bit of a risk. There might be somebody that comes in for a couple of years, that's understandable, they can work with those people and then they might leave and go somewhere else. And a lot of, I think, institutions perhaps don't want that. They want somewhere to stay forever, and they might need to be a little bit more realistic about that. International schools are sites which people move around quite a lot and are able to kind of have that life of moving between different institutions and experiencing that. But just the other aspect of things, which perhaps ties back to the last couple of points there, is that we also want teachers to have the space to enjoy teaching. And so there are some risks around the use of WhatsApp and the use of different connective technologies that teachers never turn off. They might be in a different country, but they never get to experience it because they feel they're constantly having to kind of develop and be a professional teacher 24/7, 365 days a year. And so I think part of what is required to make teaching more attractive is a sense in which it is a vocation, it is something that beats in your heart, it is something that you want to do all the time, but you're allowed to also be a person, you're allowed to have a family, you're allowed to engage in the life around you. And I think that's part of what Dennis is speaking to, about making sure that the working conditions are also there. So yes, we want young people to travel to become teachers in different jurisdictions, but we also want them to experience life when they're there, and that's part of the issue. And I don't think you'll necessarily get that by creating a new qualification. It's something about the culture and the understanding of how teachers move around the world.
I think teachers are just great human beings, aren't they? They're just such great human beings, and they work so hard and they work such long hours, and the job never finishes, and you could be on holiday. I know my phenomenal teachers. My school is such a fantastic success, and it couldn't have been without the teachers. It just couldn't have been. And they could be on holiday on a beach, they could be walking in the forest or the woods, they're still WhatsApping and messaging, as you said. The job never ends. But you're absolutely right, you need to be able to really experience your own life and your own adventures as well as a human being to be able to be a great teacher in the classroom, I think. Teachers themselves are increasingly connected, as you said, Professor Hardman, with WhatsApp, Facebook, and so in a way that global teacher fraternity already exists. And of course, Augustine, you will know better than most that through online platforms and WhatsApp and Facebook groups, our own Global Teacher Prize ambassadors are made up of lots and lots of finalists, regularly keeping contact and connect and share some great ideas. How important then, Augustine, do you think this trend is, and how do you think it will grow and it will transform teachers and professional development?
Well, thank you, and I think it's a good question for what is coming. I will say that all these new ways are here to improve, but not just to replace. So they will help us to improve what we were doing and to increase the outreach of our, for example, the development opportunities. Before, most of the important development opportunities were on the capital cities or on the big cities, and now through this we can reach out to the rural areas, and we can be more open, more generous with the training opportunities. So that's our good opportunities that we need to take into advantage and bring them to stay. I can't agree more with Mark when what he was saying before, and let me share with you one specific of our program. But we have WhatsApp groups to deliver part of the training, not all, but to create a community and to bring the interaction among teachers. But those groups, we only open them for discussions 2 hours per day. So from 5 to 7 p.m., you are able to share not only your initiatives and how you are doing with the program, but also to ask questions to other colleagues, but only for 2 hours. Because if not, we know what happened. If that group is open, there will be 24 hours of messaging and ideas, and because teachers don't stop. So we need also to help them to stop and to put the right time for the training, for delivery, and also for a personal balance. What I will say after this, that something that we need to strengthen is the communities. Dennis was talking about the shortage of teachers and bringing new teachers, also learning from the old teachers in the schools. What I think we need to strengthen here is the community, is the young teachers with the old teachers coming together. And that's a responsibility mainly of the principal. We need to strengthen our communities in order, we know that most of the teachers that are quitting the profession are doing that on the first 5 years because they find it very hard. So we need to support new teachers with the old teachers. So let's find the ways, I don't have the answer, to strengthen our communities per school, through the principal, through the teacher, and we can all learn from one another and improve what we are doing as a group. So I really trust on those communities of teachers and principals, looking forward for what is coming next.
I really enjoyed your concept of communities and really growing teachers within the stakeholder community that you belong to in a way. One of the really good practices that I've seen in my time is when a school fully believes in the coaching and the mentoring model, and not as a tokenistic gesture, but genuinely believes in it. As Dennis was saying earlier, using your more experienced teachers to support the inexperienced teachers or the younger teachers or the new teachers. It really does make for a great community feel and a family feel, if you like. And as we all know, that teacher training is incredibly expensive, depending on the different curricula that you're teaching. And it's not just about teacher training, it's about the curriculum offer as well. And it can be incredibly expensive. And one of the things that we've seen and governments have endorsed is that online teacher training is less expensive. What do you think, Dennis, governments can do to reduce the cost of individual institutions, individual schools, for the cost of teacher training? Because sometimes it's so expensive that principals find it very difficult to prioritize in a school. And in particular, when you're in a school where money is a scarce resource, you have to try and sort of invest in your teachers, but you also have to invest in the food and the resources for the children. What other incentives or initiatives do you think the governments can put in place to encourage people to go on to teacher training, and principals to permit their teachers to go on to teacher training?
Yeah, thanks. There are several things that can be done. First of all, let's remember that it is the responsibility of the government actually to ensure that teachers are trained. In fact, the instruments I was referring to earlier on, the 1966 recommendation, states very clearly that professional development should be provided free of charge to teachers. So governments must not leave it to the schools to do it. Governments must fund it, actually. Of course, there are school or cluster-based programs that can be led and initiated by teachers, school principals, and others. Those are also useful. And then, of course, if teachers are going on further studies, there should be replacement. Governments must pay for the replacement so that the individual can go on further education. And of course, their experience, their qualifications, their remuneration must continue to be kept, to be recognized, so that when they come back, they are able to start where they left. They should not be prejudiced in any way. So all these options are available for governments, for teachers, for education institutions. I just want to stress one more important point, thinking about digital technologies. I know that we have to focus on digital technologies, but one biggest lesson we've learned through COVID-19 or from COVID-19 is actually that it doesn't work. I'm sorry to sound so drastic. Children are not learning, actually. Only 12% of households in least developed countries have access to a computer at home. So as we move forward, it's important that governments invest in infrastructure, including electricity, computerization of schools, connectivity, in training teachers to be able to provide teaching and learning virtually, but also, of course, face-to-face, which is preferred and which is the most effective. Thank you.
Really interesting points there. Amy, did you want to come in, or was it an earlier point you wanted to come in to?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the point that Augustine was making about building communities. We produced a report last year and put forward the concept of learning teams, which is about putting the learner at the centre in the school, having a teacher that takes obviously the primary focus on teaching and learning, but building a team of people around that learner led by a teacher, which might address their welfare needs, their psychosocial needs. It will likely link with the community and do a lot of parents and engagement. And so looking at what is that team of people that learners need to actually be able to succeed, and how does that then link to the community and the expertise you can draw on within the community. And the concept of learning teams also insinuates that those that are part of learning teams should continue to learn throughout their careers and as context changes. So I just wanted to put that forward as something that we're really working on. How do you implement that in practice, and how can governments think more systematically about building those teams and making sure that least experienced, most experienced teachers work together, but also different roles within the school.
Absolutely. And in terms of funding and making sure that those initiatives are live and at the forefront, the governments do support, because principals have so many different priorities in a school that it's really important that when the government does prioritize things, we do have to follow through. Not that we do that all the time. And Dennis's point was a really good one, in terms of there are so many different frameworks, so many different strategies that we can use to improve our teacher training. But in particular, governments must take responsibility for teacher training, because this is something that's incredibly important to the economic stability, to the longevity, to the health of a nation. So it's really, really important governments do support. We have a question here, and I'm happy for any one of the panelists to please volunteer to answer this. It's from the audience. COVID-19 has forced teachers to embrace or scale up the use of digital tools for remote learning with back to normal. How can these gains be sustained to promote more innovative teaching and learning? Thank you, Andrea. Augustine, do you want to?
Yeah. Happy to read. I was looking to learn from others, but
I wait for volunteers and then I pick. Thank you.
That's okay. I think the challenge, not only on this question, that is how to sustain these gains, in other ways, also let me add, in parent collaboration, parent engagement with teachers. That is something that also grew a lot during the pandemic, and we want to keep it in the life of the schools. I think the challenge we have is how to institutionalize the good changes of the pandemic, the good outcomes of the pandemic. There are many tragedies. I agree with Dennis. We are going through a really hard time, but there are also some good points, some good things going on. And we need to make sure that our governments institutionalize those changes so that governments learn from what teachers are doing today in innovative ways, and to make that at a scale, and to make that something that they can share with others. So as also Dr. Reina, you were saying, those teachers doing great things need to be the mentors for others. But what we need to do, or what I will say governments needs to do, is to identify very clear those critical points and or do those advantages, and from that look for a scale.
Thank you. And Mark, did you want to, Professor Hardman, should I say very quickly, would you like to add anything?
Just very quickly, I think it goes back to the old adage, if there's something that you're doing that a robot can replace, then let the robot replace it. So if the technologies are allowing you to do something that that perhaps the teacher doesn't need to do, for example, delivering content, the chalk and talk, we could let the technology do that and free up the time for the teachers to engage in the more critical and interesting discussion. And that's going to also speak to the point about improving working conditions. So use the technology, but use it wisely to replace the bits of teaching that can be replaced, and let teachers do the bits that they're best placed to do.
Couldn't have said it better. It's about enhancement and not replacement. It's not about disruption, which is a key word for everybody, but actually we don't want to disrupt anything. We want to enhance our teaching and learning. Time has flown, panelists. In one word, Amy, we'll start with you, please. In one word, how can we make this better?
How can we make the COVID situation better? Sorry.
Teacher training better.
By involving teachers in what they need and what they, and how to best to implement it.
Thank you. Augustine, one word, how can we make this better?
Trust.
Perfect. Professor Hartman?
Communities.
Community. I think community.
Perfect. Dennis?
Dialogue.
Wonderful dialogue. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What a fantastic panel discussion. What a fantastic panel. It's my pleasure to have listened to you today. It's clear that our world has never needed well-educated citizens more than it does now, and that a well-trained and qualified teaching force is an absolute priority for all of us. We've had some great ideas about how we can deliver on this, but as always, these words need to be put into action, and urgently so, I would say. Teachers with the right level of expertise can't do the job. We need desperately for them to have great role models, great coaches, great teachers, as we've heard from the panel, really showing them the way. Teachers are precious and need to be nurtured and helped to grow so that they can transform generations of young people into smart, informed, creative and ethical citizens capable of taking the opportunities our increasingly complex and exciting world offers, as well as meeting the challenges we all face today. Children carry the hope of all our futures, and teachers are the people who steer them courageously towards their goals. Training teachers has never been more important, never ever has it been more important, and we've heard today how we can do this for all our teachers and all our children. I am Dr. Saima Rana, and I want to thank everyone on the panel, and for all of you listening, thank you so much for joining us today. And our message to the global teacher fraternity is, each time you share good practice, you collaborate across nations, you support each other and partner with teachers, you mentor or you coach, you are growing teachers, you are training teachers. Please never underestimate the impact you have when you open your classroom doors for others to enter and see and learn and watch and observe. Teacher training is the one best thing any of us can do. The growth of our teacher fraternity is our responsibility. This has been Talking Education with the Varkey Foundation, and we look forward to seeing you at the next discussion. Take care. God bless.